Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome you to the first of a three-part series entitled Mind, Body, and Spirit, Health Care in Transition. In introducing this three-week series, I want to thank the North Idaho College Convocation Series and that given committee for providing us these speakers. They have had speakers here for 5 days dealing with this very important topic. I wish to start the program by inviting to our show today Dr. Herb Goldberg. Dr. Goldberg holds a baccalaureate and PhD in the field of psychology. He is a professor of psychology at California State University in Los Angeles and is also in private practice. In addition to his private practice, he is an author and a lecturer, and among his books are first one, Creative Aggression, co-authored with G.R. Bach. He has also written one entitled The Hazards of Being Male, one called The New Male, a book entitled The New Male-Female Relationship, and another book entitled Money Madness, co-authored with R.T. Lewis. These are only a few of his many list of accomplishments, and we're very happy to welcome him to our program today.
Hi, good to be here.
And I'm happy to have three members of the panel today to question our distinguished guests on this very important topic. First of all is Dr. Owen Cargill, who is the Dean of Instruction at North Idaho College, and next to him is Joanne Brogan, who is the Director of the Division of Nursing at North Idaho College, and it is her division that's putting on this convocation series. And our third regular panelist is Janelle Burke, an attorney in Coeur d'Alene. I shall invite Dr. Cargill to commence the questioning.
Dr. Goldberg, you suggested that men and women in contemporary society engage in an actor-reactor relationship. I wonder if you'd define that for us and give us a little background on why you believe that to be so.
Well, very simply, if you look at the way men and women relate on a personal level, the male is the initiator, typically the female is the reactor. Very few women, if they find a man attractive, will initiate a conversation with him, ask him for his telephone number, call him up for a date, decide on the restaurant, make the first sexual advance. Typically, it's the male role to act and the female role to react. The man has to initiate the first conversation, ask for the phone number, get the relationship started, make a lot of the early decisions. In classically traditional relationships, that often continues well into the relationship. But that is a very dangerous paradigm because the undertow of that is that actors feel responsible and guilty when things go wrong. Reactors feel controlled and powerless. They feel like they have no identity. The relationship is doomed to the woman being enraged at the male because she'll blame him for the fact that she has no identity and that she's being controlled. The man is doomed to a kind of a guilt about everything he feels because he feels responsible, and to hiding himself because of that, to feeling responsible, to feeling self-hating. And the end point of the traditional male-female relationship, particularly in an intimate setting, is a guilty man and an angry woman. And feminism is a traditional movement that's a direct symptomatic outgrowth of feminine conditioning. And men are stuck in many ways because they feel responsible and too self-hating to really take care of themselves, and are not doing very well in many cases as a result.
Thank you.
Joanne Brogan.
You used the term gender polarization.
Right.
Would you explain on that and also how this impacts health?
Right. Gender polarization simply means that most of the dimensions of life are polarized between the sexes. A dimension of aggression, for example, the more feminine a woman is, the more her aggression is repressed and denied. She's uncomfortable with anger. She fears conflict. She sees herself as a victim. The more masculine a man is, the more his aggression is exaggerated. It's often dangerously out of control. He'll get into unnecessary fights and confrontations just to prove he's not afraid. His aggression is often hair-trigger and self-destructive, what I call macho-psychotic. Autonomy dependency is another polarization. The macho male is rigidly autonomous. He thinks that strength means needing nobody, the Lone Ranger. His feminine wife has an insatiable desire for closeness, is completely comfortable with dependency and being close. Sexuality is polarized. The man's obsessed with sex, uncomfortable with touching. The woman is obsessed with touching, uncomfortable with sex. The man is an egomaniac. His assertion is way out of bounds. He knows answers to things he hasn't even questioned yet. And her identity is sort of dissolving. She has a tendency to be self-abnegating, to be uncomfortable defining what it is she likes and doesn't like, saying clear yes or no, setting her boundaries and limits, consequently winds up feeling, taking a self-sacrificing posture and feeling like she's abused. And that translates into the body. Most of the experience of the way we experience the body is polarized. Men repress pain and think that it's masculine to triumph over pain. Women, in the typical macho Earth Mother marriage, the man pretends he's never ill and then drops dead of a heart attack at age 52. The woman is always complaining of some kind of symptom, but seems to carry on till 85 or something. He thinks sleeping is feminine. She loves to sleep. He thinks that it's masculine to, on some level, to do almost without sleep. He's proud if he can say, I only sleep 3 hours a night. He's sort of hyper. He's uncomfortable with touching. She loves touching. She's obsessed with diet and very concerned and almost magical about the food that she eats and how much to eat and when to eat it, and very often up on the latest diet. He has a negative attitude towards diet. To him, diet is steak and a beer and a cigarette, and all these diet books are a bunch of junk. He's uncomfortable asking for help and thinks that most doctors are frauds, and she loves doctors. And in other words, you take all the dimensions of the body and the way we experience and relate to it, and the masculine feminine way is on opposite ends of the continuum in proportion to the traditional conditioning. You see the pure forms in certain parts of the country, and the more liberated parts of the country, it becomes a little cloudier.
Janelle Burke.
Following up on the last question, do you see the forms of traditional ways that people behave breaking down now? And if so, how are they breaking down? How are the traditional roles beginning to break down?
Well, I think that the surface parts have definitely broken down. I mean, women are much freer today. Women have owned their sexuality, they've become assertive, they're comfortable with their aggression, they're into sports and self-defense, they're concerned with autonomy and career. And men likewise, they haven't come as far as women, but there's greater permission for men to be gentler, to be more involved as fathers, to be less competitive if they choose to be so, to articulate their feelings and things of that sort. On a deeper level, things haven't changed very much. Once men and women seem to interact and marry, they tend to polarize just like grandmas and grandpas do, and their fights are pretty much the same as grandpa and grandma might have fought had she had the guts to fight her husband, which she probably didn't. But a lot of the liberated couples have a very traditional process, and the woman still feels neglected, and the man still feels engulfed, and the woman still tends to get overly emotional during an argument, and the man tends to get quiet and withdrawn, and wants to be left alone, and is overly rational, and so those deeper aspects of what I call the gender unconscious don't give very easily, because they're what I would call ego defenses. They're powerful defenses that are the same as a neurotic defense, and consequently is also socially supported, and so consequently change on that level is very, very slow and difficult, but I think is beginning to happen in little ways, but it's just the baby stages.
Dr. Goldberg, I was very impressed with your presentation, in particular the portion where you dealt with, since the 1960s, how women, in particular through organizations and speaking and becoming assertive for basic rights that they have and wanting to assert those, that it's been very conspicuous in the public, whereas men who have attempted to bring change, it's been much more subtle and less public. Would you spend some time with our viewing audience to explain why that has happened?
Sure, because femininity causes the repression of a woman's power side, her external side. Femininity internalizes a woman. She's heavily focused on needs and feelings and relationships and the personal side of life, uncomfortable with the power side of life. Aggression, assertion, autonomy, which translates into discomfort over competitiveness and fighting and money issues and things of that, political issues and all of that. And you can make a movement about that, because when you don't have a power side and you're reclaiming your power side, there are very concrete legislative things you can do. You can go out there and you can fight for jobs, you can fight for your right to do certain things, you can fight for your independence, you can do all of those things. Masculinity is a hyper exaggerated power manifestation with a repressed personal side. The macho male, the masculine male, is out of touch with feelings. He's disconnected from the personal elements of life. He frequently has no friends. He has a kind of a rigid relationship with his own kids. And he's not tuned in on that side. He's more tuned in to the power side. So men's liberation means the redevelopment of the intimate or personal side of a man's life. You can't make a movement out of that. You can't make a movement out of, you can't legislate a man's right to have a buddy, his right to be close to another man as a friend without being called a homosexual for it. You can't legislate a man's right to express his emotions or to acknowledge fear or weakness or vulnerability. In fact, that tends to be laughed at by the media. The media tends to make fun of men's liberation as a kind of a wimpy, sort of a pathetic thing with a bunch of maudlin guys. When in fact, it's what we're talking about when we're talking about men's liberation is simply humanization. The man's right to be something more than a working machine. His right to put a priority on the personal, intimate, connected side of his life, to be a father to his children and to put a priority on that, to have a woman who's an equal partner who he doesn't have to feel guilty because he can't do everything for her, to his right to be a sexual partner without feeling responsible for everything that goes on in the bed and self-hating when he can't perform, to his right to run as well as to fight, to his right to say I'm afraid, to his right to ask for help, to his right to take care of himself physically without being ashamed of it, to pay attention to what he eats and how much he sleeps, and to exercise in ways that are healthy and not self-destructive. You can't make a movement out of that. Now, they've tried. Most of the men's movement, however, is simply a militant, angry reaction to things that have gone on in the women's movement. And many men who feel ripped off in custody cases, in divorce cases, lost their children in a custody battle where they felt they were treated unfairly, supporting a woman who is abusing the custody, military issues, the feeling that women and men should take equal responsibility for fighting wars, and things of that nature, but it's very limited. The real men's movement is a support movement among men giving each other support in their efforts to humanize their lives and to lead a more balanced life rather than a macho mechanical life.
Thank you. Dr. Cargill.
Dr. Goldberg, for men and women raised in the traditional sense, how do they go about overcoming some of the problems associated with their actor-reactor roles in society?
It's very tricky. Once a relationship is started on that level, it's often hard to break that rhythm. And that's why often these couples try, and then they finally have to go somewhere else to start off. Hopefully the best way to do it is to do it before you get together with somebody. If you try to do it after the relationship is started, it requires a lot of security on both partners' parts, because in the traditional relationship, there's a lot of double messages. Change, but don't change in a way that threatens me. And so, on the one hand, partners encourage their partner to change, but on the other hand, undermine them when they think that something is going to happen that affects their security. So you get a lot of crazy making. The man telling the woman he wants her to be independent and strong, but be home at 4:45 and make me dinner. He says, I want you to be sexual and take responsibility for that, but don't put any pressure on me. Women doing the same, telling a man to feel, they want a man to show his feelings, but they're only supposed to be nice feelings. They don't want to see the unnice feelings. They don't want to hear that the guy is bored, angry, in conflict, interested in other women or something of that sort. And the moment he says that, they all of a sudden feel hurt and want to punish him in the old-time way. So it requires an enormous amount of awareness and commitment to not blaming your partner. And if you really want to change with your partner, then you have to create an atmosphere that allows your partner to come out from hiding. And when he or she comes out from hiding, you can't punish him for it. You can't set them up. You can't encourage them on the one hand to open up and grow, and then slap them down and hold it against them because they're not growing in a way that makes you comfortable.
So just to follow up, what you're suggesting is it could be psychologically dangerous to attempt to change the traditional model.
And it's very dangerous to change anything too quickly, too. You know, you can't leap into change. You have to approximate it slowly. You can't expect too much. You also, in psychology is a kind of a funny field where people have a hard time grasping the fact that psychological responses are just as real as physiological responses, just as powerful and permanent in many cases, and to change them requires tremendous effort. People think that, we get a lot of this pop psychology. You can be anything you want to be. All you have to do is set your mind to it, and you can change anything you want. That's just really misleading and not true. And consequently, what it results in is that many couples will work on change for a couple of weeks, and then they'll be kind of moving along, and then all of a sudden one of the partners will do something that is regressive in some way, and the other couple will say, "See, you're phony, you're not really changing," and they'll be impatient with each other's changes. That real change is ragged, it's crude, it's rough, it takes a long time. And we need to be real patient with each other in that change process, because at best, real change takes place slowly and painfully.
Thank you.
Joanne Brogan.
I guess I have a couple comments, but one, do you really see that the change is coming about, or is it a surface change, more of a talking about the liberation between the two roles rather than a real deep-rooted change?
Well, as I said before, the surface things have really changed. Mm-hmm. The deeper aspects have not changed very much, if at all. And unfortunately, much of women's liberation has not really freed women so much as turned a lot of women into female machos. And so they've adopted in many ways the masculine defense style of being compulsive workers and fiercely ambitious and controlling and rigidly autonomous and all of that kind of thing, because they're entering into a world that's been created by macho men, and in order to survive in it, they find that they almost have to find a way to play that game, maybe with a feminine facade, but underneath they have to develop the same kind of ruthless style that men adapt when they want to be successful top dogs. I think we have a big problem in that so much of our economy and society is an expression of that polarization. And most of us would like in liberation to have the best of both worlds, and you can't have the best of both worlds. They want the football player and the cheerleader superimposed on each other. So you have the best of both worlds. We thought we could have that in sexual liberation, that somehow sexual liberation would mean that the man would be sensitive but still and loving and intimate, but he would still be the same macho performer of old. And that women's liberation would mean that the woman now was more sexually active, but she would also still be compliant and loving and feminine and sweet. You can't have them both, because one comes at the expense of another. And you can't superimpose two defensive opposites into one person. When true change is not necessarily a blend of those two. It's a new unknown. And in many cases, when a woman says she wants a liberated man, what she really wants is a surgeon who cries. And what a man says when he wants a liberated woman, he wants an IBM executive who comes home at 4:45 to prepare dinner and hold his hand. And you can't have that. What makes a man a surgeon prevents him from crying in many cases. What makes a woman an IBM executive prevents her from wanting to come home at 4:45 to hold your hand and adore you. Yet we all are kind of narcissistic enough to think that we can have the best of both worlds, and that is a new trap.
Janelle Berg.
I'm the mother of a couple of sons. What can we do to raise our children so that they have a healthy attitude about themselves and also toward members of the opposite sex?
My own feeling is that that if you want to, the best thing you can do for your children is work on yourself. I think that children model their parents. They don't listen to what you say. They identify with who you are in some deep way. Your deepest responses are what they respond to. They're frequently beyond your even beyond your consciousness. And so I think the best way any parent can help their child is by becoming as self-aware as possible and working on their own emotional and growth issues, so that they're not doing something unconsciously that's harming their children.
Is that both mother and father?
Both mother and father, yes.
And is there any difference in the way mothers react to sons, or fathers react to sons, and fathers to daughters, or mothers to daughters?
Well, traditional women have a tendency to over-mother, and traditional men have a tendency to under-father. Women have a tendency to over-parent, to be obsessed with parenting, and men have a tendency to be uncomfortable with it. And so, and particularly men with their sons tend to be very frightened if they think their son is showing any characteristics that won't prepare him for the jungle world out there. And the mother maybe tries to balance that by being overprotective, and the son comes and cries on mommy's shoulder. He's afraid to talk to his daddy. So that has to be rebalanced. The dad has to get comfortable with realizing that so much of his perception of the world is a projection of his own unconscious, and that he's created that jungle outside as much as that jungle actually exists. And women have to see how they overattach to their children, and often use their children as a way of validating themselves in some way, or sometimes even of gaining power in a relationship. It's a tricky issue. Parenting is a tricky issue.
And do I hear you saying, though, that if a child is raised in a traditional home, that they will be more likely to be traditional in their expectations of their relationships in the future?
On a deepest level, that's true. Now, they may go through a period in which they violently react against their traditional parents and act in extreme other ways, but sooner or later they come back and start to behave like their parents do. Yeah.
I think you have another great insight that you shared with our audience, and I would like for you to do that with the viewing audience. You indicated that in the traditional roles of men and women, that out of the frustration that arises oftentimes in the end, that men have a very serious guilt complex and that women have a great anger.
Sure.
Would you please explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, as I was pointing out, that's the psychological endpoint of the actor-reactor interaction. Reactors feel controlled. Because they feel controlled, they build up anger, and when they stay in a relationship long enough, that anger turns to rage. And they wind up hating their husband, even though their husband may on the surface have been a nice guy. So they'll wind up saying, he's a good provider, and he was a good father, and he was a nice guy, but I'm so angry when I'm around him, I don't even know what it is. I just can't be myself. I just feel like he controls me, and I got to leave him. And the man, meanwhile, because he has this omnipotent ego that says I can do anything and be anything, he feels responsible when things go wrong and self-hating and guilty when he can't omnipotently transform a situation the way he wants to. And of course, in relationships, most men are borderline idiots anyway, and really can't read signals correctly, can't tune in properly, and operate more from their head than from their ability to read correctly what's going on, and then get very frustrated because they try to find how-to answers to make everything okay. So when things start to fall apart, they'll say, well, what do you want me to do to change, and how should I do that, and et cetera, and by then it's too late.
Dr. Cargill.
So far, so far we've been discussing relationships between men and women who are involved in a marriage or a deep emotional relationship. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on whether or not these kinds of responses also are in effect in the workplace or in general societal interactions.
Not as much. In generally, when men and women are not intertwined in an intimate relationship, they can usually monitor their own responses better. women, for example, are able to retain a posture of strength and independence and assertiveness and sexuality much better when they're not married, so to speak. And men are able to be liberated, to be gentle, to be caring, to be tuned in much more when they're single. And there's no pressure. There aren't all the rituals and all of that unconscious stuff that goes on when two people say I do or commit themselves to each other. The real core seems to come out under marriage, which is a kind of a stress situation. Marriage is stressful because it requires a lot of accommodation and repression of things inside of you to try to please the other person, and that's when you see the core come out. In workplaces are a little different because workplaces are not real interactions. They're role-playing interactions. Nobody expects you to be real. In fact, if you're real, you're not going to last very long with most companies. They're not comfortable. You're never going to make it up in a corporation if you try to be real. If you're going to make it in a corporation, you have to find out what the corporation wants and you give it to them, what the corporation image is, and you play it. And so women who are successful in the corporate world are doing the same thing. They're trying to adapt themselves to the role expectations. And so what you're getting is acting and not genuine expression of the deeper self, and so the issues are different. But there's still a tendency for women to feel victimized in work situations and to blame the macho establishment for their failures, and men to relate to women in macho-type ways often, and not to be able to take a woman too seriously. There's still a lot of that going on the bottom line, too.
Joanne Brogan, about 30 seconds.
What's an appropriate way to get in touch with your personal self?
Well, it depends on what level you're talking about, but if you're talking about what I call the gender unconscious, the deeper self, it may not be possible to do it yourself. You may need some intervention of some kind, somebody to help you, some professional person, or if you have a real loving friendship and of the kind where you can get real genuine feedback from somebody and you won't punish them for it. Education is an opener, but it's not enough because education primarily operates on the rational level. And many of us know all the answers, but translating that into process is a different problem.
With that, I must bring our program to conclusion. On behalf of our staff, Dr. Goldberg, thank you. You've been a delight having here and been most informative.
Well, it's been a joy. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Dr. Herb Goldberg speaking on mind, body, and spirit, health care, and transition. I want to invite you to be with us again next week and the week after that when we will have parts 2 and 3 of this very important topic. I would like to also invite you to write to us at any time and we will respond, and we will also pass on your comments to our guest. I would like to wish you a very good week, and please be with us next week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.